We're 263. Let's stand together on that one. A shelter in the time of storm. The Lord's our rock, in him we hide, a shelter in the time of storm. Secure whatever ill betide, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. A shade by day, defense by night, a shelter in the time of storm. No fears, alarm, no foes affright, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. The raging storms may round us beat, a shelter in the time of storm. We'll never leave our safe retreat, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, rock divine, oh, refuge dear, a shelter in the time of storm. Be thou our helper ever near, a shelter in the time of storm. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. Oh, Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a shelter in the time of storm. Amen. You may be seated. All right. Who can help us with the children's missionary offering tonight? Mr. Titus. Thank you, buddy. right. Tonight, Miss Sybil and Miss Lydia are going to come and sing for us. So you young ladies come on.
As the deer panted for the waters, so my soul longeth after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone make my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You're my friend and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone make my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone make my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Behold, Satan hath desired to have you. Behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee. I have prayed for thee. Let thy face fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen my brethren. Behold, Satan hath desired to have you. Behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee. I have prayed for thee. Let thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren.
Beautiful singing, young ladies, beautiful singing. Let's open up the scriptures to the 22nd chapter of Luke this evening, Luke 22. And I just cannot can't get over that second song they sang there. And just how the Lord's prayed for us. How the Lord's prayed for us. You know, behold, Satan hath desired thee. I'm telling you, folks, if you are living for the Lord in this world today, you are in his crosshairs. He wants you. He wants you. He absolutely does. And consider this. The ratio of Christians to demons gets closer and closer the fewer Christians there are. That means, you know, the fewer people that are living for the Lord, there's going to be a greater number of enemies that can spend their time on you. We're living in a day, all right. We sure are. But with all those, with all that's against us, let's not let that discourage us, because we have someone that is praying for us. And it's God's Son. And his prayers are effectual. They worked for Peter. I can't help but think that the pressure that must have been on Peter after he denied the Lord, and how the devil must have been just discouraging him and depressing him. And Peter probably, his faith would have failed had not the Lord prayed for him. He did. He did. And if Jesus prayed for Peter, I'm telling you, sure as you and I are here today, he's praying for you. He sure is. He sure is. So let's look for a little bit again in this chapter, Luke 22. And I'd like to pick up in verse 39 this evening. Luke chapter 22 and verse number 39. And we're going to try to maybe jump a little bit around in this chapter, because I realize we jumped a little bit around this morning, and tonight we're going to have to try to fill in some of these gaps. But picking up in verse number 39, it says, and he came out and went as he was wont to the Mount of Olives. And his disciples also followed him. Somebody tell us, what's Jesus always doing in the Mount of Olives? He's always praying. And verse number 40. And when he was at the place, which kind of makes me think there was a certain place in that garden or in the Mount of Olives that he went to pray. He said unto them, notice what the Lord said to his disciples, pray that ye, that's plural, enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, kneeled down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. There appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And isn't that often the result of prayer? Is strength. Verse number 44 says, and being in an agony, what a descriptive word. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. And let me just say, oftentimes that you and I practice the reverse. Sometimes when we're in agony or agonizing over something, sometimes we cease in prayer. But verse number 44 says about Christ, it says, being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. That's an interesting phrase. I don't have all that down, and that's not the direction of the study tonight. But sleeping because of sorrow, sleeping for sorrow. That's interesting. Verse 46, and said unto them, Why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. I want to repeat 2 verses. Notice what verse number 40 says. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. And then jumping down to verse number 45, it says, And when he rose up from prayer and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. In our text this evening, we can see that there was definitely a missed opportunity here. Did anybody notice what that missed opportunity was? It's there. I promise you it's there. It's really pretty obvious. The disciples had an opportunity to do something. And you're exactly right. They had the opportunity to pray. And when you look at it that way, and you see that they missed it, they missed that opportunity. Wow. And so, briefly from the text here, I just want to look at missing spiritual opportunities. It's been said that you can do a man no truer good than to pray for him. You cannot do me, there's not a better thing you can do for me than to pray for me. And I don't think there's a better thing that I can do for you than to pray for you. But I'm telling you, here this evening, when we're reading in this text, there was a missed opportunity, and the disciples, they absolutely missed it. Before Calvary, now Jesus is literally praying here, and he's praying to such a degree that the Bible says he's in such an agony. There's such a stress. There's such a pressure upon the Lord that his blood vessels in his sweat glands are rupturing. And the blood is seeping out of his pores and combining with his sweat. And as the Lord's praying, his sweat is red with blood. That's some kind of prayer there. It's some kind of prayer to be praying and being under enough pressure that you're sweating. But then to add the element of agony and stress to it, that the vessels are rupturing and blood is coming out, that is some kind of praying. I don't think we appreciate what kind of suffering the Lord was going through here. I know we don't, and I know even tonight, as we're looking at the text, I'm gonna fall way short of bringing any justice to what's being done here. I recognize that. But nothing great for God has ever been done apart from prayer. And here Jesus is praying. He's praying specifically about the work that's going to take place on Calvary. And Calvary was bathed in blood. I'll put it this way. Before Calvary was bathed in blood, it was bathed in prayer. And that's what we see going on here. And nothing great for God has ever been done apart from prayer. You want to do something big for God? You want to do something great for God? You're not going to do anything unless you first pray about it. I mean, if there's going to be something big, if you're going to allow God, if you're going to let God to do what he wants to do with your life, you're going to first have to let God do what he wants to do with you in the matter of prayer. You're going to have to pray. God's great work of salvation was bathed in prayer. But before we look a little bit farther into this, I want us to step back and make sure we've got the bigger picture of all that's going on here, at least in Luke 24, in some of this chapter. And all these things in chapter 22, most of them, it's all happening within probably a span of a few hours, several hours here. But it was on this day that one of Jesus' disciples, Judas, became possessed by Satan himself. And Judas is out he's out planning to betray the Lord. That's going on in the background. Jesus' disciples, of all things, are arguing about what? What were they arguing about earlier in the day? Who's going to be the greatest? Boy, what a group the Lord had to work with. Satan is out to get Peter. He wants to sift him as wheat, but not just Peter. Satan also wants to get the other disciples as well. The disciples are so short-sighted that in this chapter, they're missing the main picture. They're missing the main point of the Lord's suffering. And instead of wanting the Lord or allowing the Lord or recognize the dire situation that they're in, if you will, the importance of the situation, they're literally wanting to fight their way out of this thing. You say, I missed that in the text. Well, let's jump to look in verse number 35. Let me remind you of this. And he said unto them, this is after he tells Peter that he's going to deny him. But verse 35, Jesus tells his disciples, when I sent you without purse and scrip and shoes, lacked you anything? They said nothing. Then said he unto them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it. He said, things are getting different today. They're going to be different. He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment, buy one. For I say unto you, that this that is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end. And the only thing the disciples heard was something about a sword. And they said in verse number 38, if you will, Lord, you want us to go get our guns? And they said, Lord, behold here 2 swords. And he said unto them, it is enough. They're wanting to fight their way through this thing. We know that because when Judas comes to Jesus, they come to lead Jesus away. What did Peter do with his sword? He tried to fight his way out of here. He did. But the Lord wasn't telling them to have a sword so they could defend him and fight their way out. If anything, it would have been for their own protection. But he's telling them, I'm getting ready to be led away and be crucified. And if they're doing this to me, you need to watch out. And he's saying, if they'll do this to me, they'll do it to you. And later on, they did. They did. They killed all the apostles, except for John. So the disciples are short-sighted. They're missing the main picture here. Also what's going on, Jesus is praying until his blood vessels are rupturing, and his disciples miss their opportunity to pray. And instead of praying, they used their opportunity to do what? Sleep. Also in the chapter, of course, Judas betrays Jesus, Peter denies Jesus, and the disciples, they flee in fear. But looking back here at the Mount of Olives, Jesus and his disciples really are in 2 different worlds here. They're both in the same garden. They were both at the Mount of Olives, but Jesus, his mind was somewhere else. His heart was fixed on something else. And when you compare where Jesus' heart and mind was at, and you look at his disciples and you see where their heart and mind was at, it was in two different places. Jesus' heart was on accomplishing his Father's will. And he knew quite well what that was. He knew that he was getting ready to be sacrificed. He knew that. He knew that he was getting ready to die for the sins of mankind. He knew that he was getting ready to face God's wrath for all the sins of all mankind. He knew that. He knew what that meant. He knew that there was going to be a separation from him and God would punish Christ for your sins and my sins. And this weight was bearing on Christ to such a degree. He was in so much agony that his vessels ruptured and blood was coming out of his pores. I cannot imagine that. They were in two different worlds. Jesus' mind and heart was on heaven. But the disciples, where was their heart fixed? Where was their mind on? Sleeping. That's two different worlds, folks. Look at verse number 40. And when he was at the place, notice what Jesus tells his disciples. He just specifically comes right out and he says, pray that ye enter not into temptation. Have you ever wondered and asked God, would you just be clear with me? Lord, would you just be specific so I don't have to guess? Lord, I don't know what's going to happen today. I just need to know exactly what you want me to do. Well, the Lord, in verse number 40, he looks at his disciples and he says, pray that ye enter not into temptation. He just says, boys, listen. I want you to pray that you don't enter into temptation. And what did they do? They fell asleep. They entered into temptation. That's right, sleeping temptation is what they did. He warns them, tells them specifically what to pray for. I want you to pray along this line, that you don't fall into temptation. You realize God has also given the very same instruction to you and me. You said, I don't know about that. Hold your place here. Look at Matthew 6 for just a minute. Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 6. Verse number 13, of course, this is that model prayer, the Lord's Prayer that he's given to us. And in the middle of this prayer, the Lord instructs us. Yes, he's telling his disciples this. But you and I also know this is God's instruction for you and me as well. And verse number 13, look what God tells us to do. Lead us. In our prayer, we petition God and say, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. That's what he's telling the disciples to do. Pray that ye enter not into temptation. I wonder how many of us in our prayers ask God, Lord, would you prevent my path and temptation from crossing today? Lord, would you keep me from that? Would you? Would you lead me away from that? Lead me not into that, God. And that's what he's telling his disciples. And instead of praying for strength to avoid temptation, instead of praying for that, and instead of using that opportunity before them for prayer, they find them a comfortable spot in the garden there and fall asleep. Wow. There was an opportunity here. I'm telling you that I believe it's what it looks like to me, that the disciples completely missed. They missed it. And that was that simple opportunity to pray. They had an opportunity to pray. Of all the missed spiritual opportunities, of all the opportunities that come before us, the opportunity of prayer is the one that we miss the most. And sadly, now we cannot be too hard on the disciples here, because they exchanged the opportunity to pray for the opportunity to sleep. And I know good and well that every one of us has made that same exchange. We've all exchanged prayer for sleep. Now, the disciples, this is probably a little different, right? They were in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus was right there. There was the essence of importance that the Lord was portraying to them. No doubt they noticed something about his countenance that was different that day. And they just missed it. And just thinking about that, I've got to ask the question, why did they miss this? Why did they sleep instead of praying here? Why do they do that? And just a couple things, and we'll just mention these things in passing here, but maybe the disciples didn't realize how important prayer really was. They just didn't realize how important it was. Let me tell you, anything that Jesus tells us to do is important. There isn't anything he tells you to do just to take up time with your life. Every single thing he tells you to do, whether he, and I'm just saying this to make a point, whether he yells it at you or whispers it to you, it's important. It doesn't matter when he says it, how he says it, where he says it. Every time he says something, it's important. But the disciples here, they didn't realize how important it was. That may be one reason why they didn't pray. Maybe they just thought, you know what? I am tired. God knows I'm tired. He knows I didn't sleep good last night. I need a nap. Maybe that's what they were telling themselves. That could be one reason. Another reason is the disciples might not have realized the situation that they were in. They just missed it. Their eyes, their spiritual eyes just didn't make the connection that their Messiah was getting ready to be crucified. And they just did not realize what day it was. Another reason, possibly, that the disciples missed this opportunity of prayer and chose sleep leisure. They didn't see what was coming up over the hill on the other side, quite literally. And somebody tell us what was coming over the hill. Who was coming over the hill? That was soldiers. It was Judas and those soldiers. They didn't see it coming. The Lord saw it coming. Maybe the disciples didn't realize how weak they really were. The Lord said, pray that you enter not into temptation. Maybe they just thought, who does he think he's talking to? Temptation. I prayed yesterday. Maybe the disciples thought that something else was more important than praying at the time. And there may be some other reasons. But as I think about the possible reasons why the disciples might not have taken the opportunity to pray that day, I've got to confess that I think these are the same reasons why you and I neglect that great spiritual opportunity to pray. I think it's the same reasons why we don't pray when we know the Lord tells us to pray. We just don't realize how important prayer really is. That, I believe, prayer's got to be, it's got to be the most important thing. I think it's the most important thing. Yeah, I think it is. Maybe we don't pray because we don't realize the situation that we're in today. And I say this is, I don't know the right word, maybe sarcasm. We don't realize how bad it really is. We're in this little honey hole in the part of our country, in the part of this world. You don't have to go too far from home, and it gets bad and it gets dark really quick. It is. We can look at our town and look at our area and say, boy, it's bad here. It is. I get that. I'm telling you, it gets really bad and it gets really ugly. It gets really dark when you get far from here. Not too far from here. You don't have to go far. You go down to Atlanta, that's spiritual darkness down there. That's spiritual wickedness in high places. You visit some of the churches throughout our country, and I don't mean, I'm not talking about little country churches. I'm talking about you visit some of these big churches that are very influential in their communities. And you just listen to some of the stuff that's coming out of the pulpits. I don't even think you can call it a pulpit. You can't even call it a church. Your Benny Hinn's, your Stephen Furtick's, your Beth Moore's. I'm telling you, there's some ugly doctrines that's spewing out of the pulpits all across this country. We don't realize the situation that we're in. Maybe we don't pray because we don't realize what's coming or how close it is. What's just over the hill for America? What's just over the hill for Christians? What's coming down the road for us? It could be severe persecution. I don't know. Maybe we don't pray because we are not honest with ourselves and we don't realize how weak we really are. Maybe we don't pray because we think there are other things that are just more important at the time. Prayer, I'm guilty myself. I don't think we realize how great an opportunity it really is to do something as simple as talking to God. The Lord said here, I want you to talk to God about this. I want you to pray about this, that you fall not into temptation, you give not into temptation, or specifically, he said that you enter not into temptation, verse 40. Maybe that's a way we should pray. But there's an opportunity to pray for strength. But that's not the only opportunity in prayer. Every person here this evening has someone that they love dearly that's lost. And you know the greatest thing that you can do for that person you have an opportunity. You have a great opportunity. I mean, a great opportunity. And that's how we'll close the service out tonight, in prayer. But there's a great opportunity. You can pray for that loved one. Yeah. You can talk to God on their behalf. And the heaviness that's on your heart can touch God's heart. Yeah. There's an opportunity to pray for those that are just weak in the faith. Maybe you know a brother or sister that's struggling. They're teetering. They're on the verge of just, you know how it happens. And there's an opportunity to petition God. God, help them. God, strengthen them. Lord, help me to encourage them. There's an opportunity. And Jesus provided that opportunity for his disciples there on the Mount of Olives. He provided the whole opportunity. He led them there. He gave them instructions, and he even gave them the time to do this. And they fell asleep. Let's close the service tonight. And let's take a few minutes as an opportunity tonight. Have altar prayer tonight, and we'll all gather around the altar. And I know everybody's not comfortable up here at the altar, and you can pray where you're at. But the opportunity before us this evening is to take a few minutes and have a time of prayer.